Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. After a raucous day in the Ontario Legislature on Wednesday, with the passage of Bill 5, things were much quieter on Thursday. In spite of protests from First Nations and opposition parties, the Ford government rammed through the controversial legislation, aims to create special economic zones in areas such as the Ring of Fire, where government and industry will bypass environmental laws in order to speed up development. The legislation would affect a number of First Nations in Northern Ontario who have rallied against it, saying the Progressive Conservatives failed to consult them before drafting the bill. Speaking from his Queen's Park office, NDP MPP Saul Mamakwa says the government appears to have underestimated the resilience of First Nations.
First Nations are already to defend their treaty rights. They're ready to defend, their Aboriginal title. They're ready to defend their land. And I think that's something that, the governments, their systems will clash with our systems.
And we will have more on Bill 5 passing coming up later in the show when our Truth and Politics panel is here. To the wildfire situation now, and so far more than 650 Manitobans have been deployed to fight wildfires across the province. And more than 175 people have come from out of province to help. But provincial government officials say despite all hands on board, they plan to keep fighting the fires for quite some time. At a wildfire update on Thursday, provincial officials shared there are currently 12 out-of-control wildfires in Manitoba, with 9 being actively fought due to their proximity to communities. 2 wildfires near Flin Flon have now merged together to create the largest at more than 300,000 hectares. They say a number of structures there have been destroyed, but are not aware of any wildfire-related losses in Pimachikamak or Puckatawagan. Around 18,000 evacuees are registered with Red Cross for shelter and support. Daily stipends from the federal and provincial governments will be administered through Red Cross to registered evacuees in the coming days. They say current cooler weather has helped the fight.
We have had cooler temperatures, a little bit higher humidity. Winds generally have been fairly low to moderate. We are expecting that general trend to continue, which will be helpful for our efforts. There is precipitation in the forecast on the weekend for some areas of Manitoba, including areas where we have fires in the northwest as well as the east. At this time, those precipitation amounts are pretty variable and uncertain. So I'd like to remind Manitobans that just because you might see a blob of rain on that precipitation map, that's not going to be enough to put out these fires.
Well, as evacuees are now getting settled in Winnipeg, the Winnipeg Police Service and the RCMP have dedicated extra resources to provide support to evacuees and protect vulnerable populations from exploitation. At a Thursday news conference, WPS Superintendent of Community Engagement Bonnie Emerson said the police have mobilized extra patrols, cars, and an Indigenous liaison team to visit evacuation centers and hotels. Inspector John Lutz said police responded to 70 dispatch calls and conducted 160 proactive engagements at evacuee sites just on Thursday. Evacuees are encouraged to report suspicious activity to the police and reach out if they need assistance. RCMP Inspector Catherine Light said about 3,000 evacuee safety brochures have been shared with the Red Cross and distributed to evacuation centers.
These enhanced safety measures and awareness campaigns are required, critically important, because we know criminals often take advantage of people during times of crisis. This includes youth, the elderly, or people who are going through a difficult time and when they're vulnerable. We are all here to help. That's why we're here today. It's important for all evacuees to know that help is available. Don't be afraid to speak up. If you feel unsafe, unsure, or overwhelmed, we are here to help.
To other news now, and Saskatoon police say they're investigating the discovery of human remains just outside of the city. On June 4th, investigators secured a scene near Highway 7, just west of the city where the remains were found. The identity not yet confirmed. Major crimes forensics and the coroner are working to determine the cause of death and if foul play was involved. No further information is available, but police say they will provide updates. Anyone with information is asked to contact Saskatoon Police or Crime Stoppers. South of the Medicine Line now, and Jonathan Joss, the actor perhaps best known for voicing John Redcorn on the animated sitcom King of the Hill, was killed in a shooting on June 1st in San Antonio, Texas. Our Sav Jonesa has more on this story.
Jonathan Joss was John Redcorn in the animated sitcom King of the Hill. The 59-year-old Comanche and Apache actor was shot and killed on Sunday in San Antonio, Texas. His husband, Tristan Kern de Gonzalez, took to Facebook alleging that Joss's death was a homophobic hate crime. In the post, he says his husband was, quote, murdered by someone who could not stand the sight of two men loving each other. Gonzalez says he and Joss were checking the mail of their former home, which burned to the ground and killed their dog in January when the shooting occurred. He alleges the couple experienced homophobic harassment from people in the area for over 2 years, but no action was taken by police when reported. A neighbor, Sigfrido Alvarez Sija, has been charged with felony first-degree murder in connection with Joss's death. There are multiple news reports that Alvarez Sija confessed. The following Monday, San Antonio police said in a statement that their investigation has, quote, found no evidence to indicate that Mr. Joss's murder was related to his sexual orientation. Later this week, San Antonio Police Chief William McManus walked back on that release.
We issued a statement, I believe it was the day after Jonathan Joss's murder, that was way premature. Shouldn't have done it. It was way too soon before we had any real information.
McManus did not say if they have since found evidence of homophobia, but says the murder and house fire investigations are still active. He clarified that police forces in Texas do not charge offenders with hate crimes. That is determined by the district attorney at sentencing. Chief McManus did say that 70 calls were made to police by Joss and neighbors over the past 2 years due to what he called neighborhood-type disturbances. Sav Jonesa, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
To the north now, where the government in Nunavut has issued a health advisory after a caribou tested positive for rabies. In April of this year, a caribou died after it was seen attacking heavy equipment in Cole Harbour. It later tested positive for rabies. The Department of Health says to dispose of meat harvested from animals suspected of having rabies. If you've been attacked by an animal with rabies, go to your local health center immediately because rabies infections have a high mortality rate. Animals that behave strangely, aggressively, and are frothing at the mouth should be avoided and reported to the Wildlife Office at 867-857-4444. Well, we're always looking for your feedback or story ideas. Here's how you can continue the conversation with us. If you have a story you'd like to share, you can send us an email to news@aptn.ca. You can read and watch our stories by going to our website, aptnnews.ca. You can also find us online on your favorite social media sites, including TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, and X. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. Time for a quick break, and then Jennifer and Negon are here for our weekly Truth and Politics panel. Stick around. Welcome back. Well, as we've been reporting, the Protect Ontario by Unleashing Our Economy Act, or Bill 5, has now been passed, despite the concerns being raised by First Nations. It's the latest piece of legislation provincial governments have been looking to approve, as jurisdictions all over are looking to get development projects off the ground in the face of the Trump tariffs. For more, our Truth in Politics panel is here. Jennifer Leywitz is the CEO of Pusquash Strategies, and Egon Sinclair is a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press. Thanks to you both for being here. Jennifer, we'll start with you. Bill 5 has passed in the Ontario legislature. Your thoughts on the bill passing and, some of the debate around this that saw MPP Saul Mamakwa removed from the legislature earlier in the week?
Well, I think we're essentially seeing what kickstarted Idle No More in the beginning essentially happening again. Legislation that's being passed that looks to override treaty rights and the duty to consult, and not just the duty to consult, but the duty to attempt to receive consent as well. And, I saw that Saul was kicked out of the chamber for essentially saying what needed to be said about, Doug Ford kind of trampling over treaty rights and being disingenuous with First Nations, which is exactly what's happening. When government continues to talk about reconciliation and continue to talk about how they want these great relationships and they respect treaty rights and all of these things, but then they're actively passing legislation that bulldozes directly over all of those components, then I think we have a pretty telling sign that, the Ontario government and Doug Ford does not take reconciliation seriously, nor does he respect treaty rights.
There was a funny clip I thought there yesterday when Ford was talking about Trump trying to bulldoze, and he wasn't going to be allowing that to happen. Egon, Saul Mamakwa was live on social media earlier this morning saying that the sleeping giant has been awoken. What do you think happens next?
Well, this situation's a little bit more complicated, I think, than what the Idle No More conditions were back in 2012, 2011, because we were facing Stephen Harper in those days. I was an activist. There were many of us that met very quickly. There was a big movement led by young students, mostly women, but that sort of singular force that was being faced off against Stephen Harper had a decade of mistreatment of Indigenous peoples, and then the omnibus legislations which sparked this national outcry. It's not quite the same thing, only because what we're seeing is kind of a whole-scale move by premiers to begin to do exactly what Jen's talking about, trample on those rights, move quickly, declare projects of national significance or provincial significance. We're also seeing, though, NDP provincial governments in BC, for example, moving very quickly to move beyond the time it takes to adequately consult and fulfill constitutional duties. So it will be something that is interesting to see, because in BC, if you look at the relationship between the BC Union of Chiefs and, of course, the NDP government, which has long been allies with one another, now it's turned into a rancorous, toxic kind of threats called between each one of them. The question will be whether First Nations people, who have all the different political tastes and political interests, will unify on this singular issue of resource development. That will be curious to see whether that happens, because we know that there's many First Nations people, for example, in Mark Carney's government, not just in ministers, but also within staff, within Indigenous affairs, and so on.
Jennifer, Bill 5, the Protect Ontario by Unleashing Our Economy Act, as Egon mentions, is not the only piece of legislation of this kind being passed by provincial governments. And First Nations in each province are saying there was no consultation. When it comes to the Ring of Fire alone, I think I've been reporting on that for like 18 years. Was there a need to rush these bills?
I think, the provinces are in a state where there is an active tug of war happening right now with the conversation around sovereignty at a provincial level, at a national level, and even with our First Nations governance. And I think what's happening now is that we're seeing provinces say, well, Ottawa has been stagnant. We haven't been seeing resource development like we should be. We're actually seeing legislation and, policy out of the federal government, like the emissions cap and things like that provinces and industry feel like are trampling on their non-existent right to essentially just get projects up and rolling at an unprecedented rate. And, I know that provinces do want to see growth in their provinces. I'm not naive to that. Industry in Saskatchewan is huge. Agriculture, potash, those are the things that keep our economy going. But at the same time, there are First Nations across the country that want to be consulted with and consent. And one of the things that I wish people knew more of is that, you know, self-determination is huge. And it's not that every nation or every First Nations person is against resource development, but it's not just about consult and consent. It's also making sure that if those decisions are made or projects go through and they are, you know, being rammed through our traditional territories, that we are active participants at the table. You know, resource revenue sharing, having those conversations, helping outline what environmental protection actually means, how those projects should move forward. But not only are these provincial governments looking to just bulldoze over our rights, get projects moving, but we're actually being left out. And our communities will continue to live in poverty because of it. And who knows the land better than our people? So any project that moves forward throughout our traditional territories, we should be at the table. And it's going to differ province by province and treaty by treaty, whether it's Dene, Cree, Dakota people, but we still need to have our protocols outlined and be at those tables.
Yeah, Nigan, there has been a lot of talk this week about who exactly should be at those tables. And earlier today, the Ford government announced that it was inviting Canada's premiers and the national Indigenous leaders to gather in late July in Muskoka to move national building projects forward. What do you expect to come out of that meeting?
Well, I was encouraged to see and hear National Chief Cindy Woodhouse identify clearly that she's not a rights holder. And so really she should not be part of these meetings. This is for rights holders within individual First Nations that are the holders of those abilities to provide consent. You know, Canada's always wanted to deal with one kind of Native person, one Native organization, one chief, and has always imposed that, whether it's in the Indian Act, whether it's in negotiations, even with the constitutional talks back in the 1980s. They've never wanted to deal with a group of people. They want to deal with one person. And that's the fundamental problem, is that we are not a monolith. We're not a one singular voice. We are 640 plus recognized First Nations, another 150 who are in the process of recognition, hundreds of Métis communities, Red River Métis Nation, which is quite identifiable, that other nations that are talking about themselves as mixed blood people in different ways. And then, of course, the Inuit communities. If anything, perhaps maybe you could talk to Inuit organizations, but even that, I think, would turn into a fractious sort of conversation. The bottom line of it is that Canada's got to find ways to be able to deal with Indigenous peoples appropriately, culturally specifically, and geographically. Because if you leave First Nations people, for example, to say, if you say to them, how do you want to deal with us, they will form. And many of them will be, for instance, the James Bay Cree. They will form their own organization and say, this is how we are going to deal with you. And they do it collectively. So the problem is, of course, this one-stop approach of forcing First Nations, Métis, Inuit governments, communities into one model.
Leon, Jennifer, we'll have to leave it there for this week. Appreciate you both being here.
Yeah, you got you.
A new episode of APTN Investigates airs this Saturday. We'll bring you a preview of Skin Deep after the break. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Fran Etzel from Tucho Francis Lake, Yukon, tells us that her time along the shoreline, enjoying some fresh cooked bannock, was the best day ever. Looks pretty good there. Thanks for sharing with us, Fran. Send your photos to share@aptn.ca for the chance to be our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the east coast, rainy and 27 in Fredericton, showers and 22 in Halifax. 8 with rain in Kuujjuaq, showers and 12 for Nain. 25 with rain in Montreal, cloudy and 23 for Val-d'Or. 16 in Sault Ste. Marie, sun's out and 27 for Ottawa. 23 in Thunder Bay, smoky and 22 for Sioux Lookout. Smoky and 23 in God's Lake, plenty of smoke and 26 in the Paw. Sunny and 26 in Winnipeg, Brandon and Dauphin. 25 with showers in Regina, cloudy and 26 in Saskatoon. 24 in Meadow Lake, 22 with showers in La Ronge. A wet day across northern Alberta, 19 with showers in High Level and Fort McMurray. 22 with showers in Edmonton, 29 in Medicine Hat. Sunny and 20 in Vancouver, 30 is the high for Kamloops. 20 in Prince George and Smithers, 15 in Dease Lake. 9 with rain in Old Crow, 16 in Whitehorse. 17 with rain in Yellowknife, 16 in Norman Wells. 6 in Sax Harbor, 7 in Pawlatuck. 7 in Chesterfield, 10 for Baker Lake. +1 with snow in Resolute, sunny and 4 in Igloolik. Every tattoo has a story. For some, it can be a constant reminder of a traumatic past, influenced by gangs and violence. This week, on an all-new episode of APTN Investigates, video journalist Tamara Pimentel meets up with 3 women as they work on erasing painful chapters of their past. Here's a preview of Skin Deep.
Billy Kozub's face tells a story. Tattoos from a life forged in the streets. It's a constant reminder of a dark time filled with gang violence and addiction. A past she wants to erase. She makes frequent visits to Mother Inc., a tattoo removal project by Della Stanky. It's funded by the province of Manitoba and city of Winnipeg and provides free services to people exiting the gang life and violence, even bringing tattoo removals behind bars to inmates getting ready to be released.
How I got started, how I opened the business in the first place was I was working at 2 federal halfway houses here in Winnipeg. They started telling me that it was because of these tattoos that they weren't leaving the yard. They were scared to either get jumped back in by their old gang or get jumped by a rival gang.
Well, this is the one that's gang affiliated. Then these 2, it says gangster on this one, and then women doing a drive-by. Getting these removed, it's kind of like shedding snakeskin. Like, I'm leaving that lifestyle behind, you know? And I know people say, you know, you're in till you're dead, or you're just, it's a commitment or whatever, like you're in for life and this and that, but no, you don't have to be.
You can catch APTN Investigates Skin Deep, airing this Saturday on APTN at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Looking forward to that one. Tamara will also join us here tomorrow to talk about the episode. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Thursday, June the 5th. For news anytime, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca. TR will be here tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for your first look at the day's news. I'm Dennis Ward. Marcy Miigwech. Thanks for being with us. Have a great night.